Okay, let's go ahead and get started today, everyone. It's finally time. Um, okay, I just want to introduce myself first, really quick. My name is Amanda Follis, and I am an archivist at the City Archives at New Orleans Public Library. We're very happy to host this session or this series called Who Gets to Vote, which is all about voting rights and the history of voting in America. Uh, we were given this grant by the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities, who helped us purchase the free books and, enlist Professor Lo Faber as our speaker today, Dr. Lo Faber. And they also did this through a program in turn developed by the Andrew Mellon Foundation and the Federation of State Humanities at the national level. Um, with that being said, today we will be covering Vanguard by Martha S. Jones, an excellent book. We're excited to discuss this and discuss the historical perspective of Black women not only gaining the right to vote in America, but being able to establish their political voice, really from the inception of the country. And I guess with that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Faber. He can tell us more about the book. And with that being said, I will actually hand it over to Dr. Faber to begin our discussion today.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Amanda. And it's great to be here doing this once again on a second Saturday. And I recognize, I think, 3 or 4 of you from last time, but we have a bunch of new folks here as well. So that is great. And as Amanda said, of course, you are under no obligation to turn your video on. But if you don't mind, we do appreciate it because it is nice to just see you and see your reactions, and just as if we were in a room together. If you're nodding appreciatively, or if you're tilting your head quizzically when something is said, that's always interesting feedback to have. And so one of the points that came up in the discussion last week is that even though the series is called Who Gets to Vote, but of course, voting is only one form, and in some ways, it's the most minimal form of political participation and engagement. And being here for a discussion like this, and for being involved in this kind of programming that the library does, is a really vital form of engagement as well. And so and I'm just going to use that as a segue into this remarkable book. Vanguard, because I think it's a really, really remarkable book on a number of levels. It's a difficult book in some ways. It's challenging, and I think it breaks some very exciting ground in his American history and African American history. And I don't want to go on about the book. I'd rather get into the discussion and hear from y'all. And you can feel free to drop your comments and questions in the chat, as Amanda said. And but we really like to hear from you. Ask your questions aloud in the Zoom. And because last week went by so fast, I would just urge you to, when you make your contributions, please just be mindful of how much time you're taking. We want to hear everything you have to say, but if you can make it a little bit concise, that helps. And we really would love to hear from everybody during the course of this hour, and at least everybody who has something they want to contribute. And with that, I think we should start talking about this book, Amanda. And do you want to go to the discussion questions?
Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this off the screen, but I just wanted to clarify one more thing. I accidentally added an extra P on the end. I was wrong. I just reposted the link to the survey in chat without the P at the end, and that does work. So what's on the screen is correct. But we are going to stop screen sharing for now, just so we can focus on each other talking. And I'm going to do that. So now it's just us. Um, if you would, I am going to drop the full discussion guide in chat if I can, really quick. Let me see here. I'm sorry. Let me get a full link for you all. I apologize to slow this down. Did you want to continue, Lo, while I grab that actual link to the guide? What we'll do is there was a guide authored by the folks who so all the scholars in Louisiana that wrote the discussion guide questions for these books, they're available both on the Program Hub webpage, which I'll link in a minute, and also I'm going to try to drop a direct link to the guide in chat. But what we'll do during the discussion is we'll kind of try to start with the questions from the discussion guide, but we can organically move out and in from there as needed. Just 1 second, let me get you the proper link. I apologize. Let's see here.
Amanda, while you're doing that, you want me to go ahead and read this first
Yeah.
question? Okay. So, by the way, if you haven't read the book, of course, you are more than welcome to be a part of this discussion and contribute to it, of course. But we do strongly recommend that you read the books. As a college professor, I can tell you they make the discussions better. And this book in particular, I think you'll really want to check out. And so it is a history of Black women's political and social activism and participation throughout the span of American history. So that's one remarkable thing about the book, is just the time period that it covers, from way back into the era of slavery, through emancipation, Reconstruction, the Jim Crow era, the suffrage movement, the New Deal, the modern civil rights era, and up to the very recent past. So it's taking in a huge arc of American history. So with that in mind, I'll just read this first question. Martha Jones reveals that her storytelling efforts were inspired by the largely unrecorded roles that women in her own family played in the struggle for Black women to gain the vote. Are there unknown figures in your family who, like Nancy, Susan, and Fannie, these are women mentioned in the book, made contributions to social change? Have they inspired you to be an agent of change? And then, how are hidden histories, like those outlined in Vanguard, I think that's a useful term, hidden histories, transformative to the men, women, and children who are members of oppressed or marginalized groups in society? How are they transformative to those who operate with privilege in society? I know that was a lot, so, but does that provoke a response from any of you? And while you're thinking about that, I'll also just add that we certainly, the discussion guide is a very useful thing to have, but we don't all need to be ruled or bound by the questions in the discussion guide either, of course, where it's much more important to us to talk about what our participants want to talk about. So.
Okay, and then I just wanted to say you can type in chat, and also or raise your hand in Zoom if you have that capability on whichever platform you're accessing it from. And I've just dropped the guide in chat too.
Great. Don't make me just start cold calling on you by name now, you know.
Oh yes. And let's see here.
Bridget says I'll start.
Sarah, do you mind if Bridget starts?
Oh, sure.
Okay, and then you'll be next.
Hi,
Yes.
Bridget.
Hi. For me, I guess my introduction to real social change and to the impact that um, my family members maybe had on the um, the change just being wrought here in Baton Rouge was integration. And so I go back to the 1960s where we were all encouraged to, well, a couple of things, all encouraged to um, open the doors to allow young Black women and men to attend the public schools here in East Baton Rouge Parish, as well as to open the doors to attending the parochial schools in East Baton Rouge Parish. I come from an inner city African American parish, and we have an elementary school. It's still in operation today. It's 101 years old. And we were encouraged to attend St. Joseph's Academy. At one time, New Orleans had St. Joseph's Academy as well. We still have one here. And it was interesting how our parents made that journey into, integration journey with us. My mother was a school teacher. She had already made that journey from an African American school to in the parish to actually to a white school in the parish. And so she helped me to understand what was going to be expected of me, and how I wasn't just representing myself, but I represented my family and my church parish, and the larger community. And that was a tall order for, soon to be freshman at, an all girls high school, not knowing what to expect, until the first day of school, we never interacted with anyone. And so it was interesting how my mother prepared me for that journey into that new world, and and then I found out for her, it was a journey that she had gone through herself because she was a graduate of Xavier University in New Orleans. She got her degree in social work. And when she came back home to East Baton Rouge Parish, she discovered that when she applied for a job, that there were no Black social workers. And she couldn't get a job. And so what she did was she went back to school and became a certified teacher. And that's what she did for 29 years. And so, it was just the trend, I guess, she had been there herself. And so she helped me to move forward. So that's my experience as being a part of social change. I hope y'all have some experiences as well.
Thank you so much for that, Bridget. And can I ask you a question or two about what you just said?
Sure.
Because of the Martha Jones focus on histories, or what the discussion guys calls hidden histories, I'm wondering about your sense of that experience, both at the time as a child and now, in retrospect as an adult. Did you have the sense of living in a period of historical change or being an agent of that change yourself? When your mother told you that you weren't just representing yourself, but you were in essence acting in a sort of public capacity, was that, how did that feel? And did you embrace that? Was it burdensome in any way? I would love to know more about what that experience was like with regard to, the history of it and how it's understood by the world.
it felt like like a ballerina being on her toes throughout the entire performance. And so for the first so many months of school, until we really kind of got comfortable, I guess, with each other. That's the way, not just me, but those of us, who attend, who came that year with me. That's the way we all felt, like we were walking on tippy toes or eggshells, as some folks would say. After my mother was, I have to admit though, that after my mother was so nice as to, kind of tell me, what my role was, she also admonished me when she dropped me off at the front door, don't get in no fights. Because she knew, I was an assertive person and it was going to be tough for me to control my tongue. And so that's what she said. And I remembered that. And I knew I was going to be questioned about that afternoon after my first day at school. So
Do
but
you
yes,
do you do you think that there's a story about integration that is still untold, or is not necessarily known or understood by those who didn't experience it personally as you did?
I I know that there's a lot of background, history there in terms of the at least within the diocese, because that's where I guess that's my background.
Sure.
I know that there's a lot of background history there, discussions that were held, among the priests, the congregations, you know, um, to prepare us to make that transition. And I really don't know all those stories. I really don't know all those stories. Yeah, and it would be interesting, probably to hear those
Yeah.
because um, I know what my mom felt. I don't know what the other mothers, are I shouldn't say just mothers, but parents, instilled in their children. We discussed among ourselves. Those of there were, and I should say this, there were 5 of us who came from St. Francis Xavier to St. Joseph's Academy, and that freshman class in 1967, and I know what our parents, discussed with us. I was not I was a member of the second class, I think it was, because the school was actually integrated in 1965, but tensions were still high. I have to
Yeah.
tell you, even when we enrolled 2 years later, they were still high, so,
Sure.
um, but I would like to know that background history, and in some cases, folks don't want to talk about it, which really makes you question what happened, But
I see Sarah has a hand raised icon there.
So the question about hidden histories made me think about our conversation from last week about what gets taught in civics classes.
Sure. Yeah.
And, I'm sure no matter how many books come out, there will always be additional histories that we never know about. And I was thinking, I think last week we also mentioned the Washington Post op-ed that Martha Jones wrote,
Right.
and how, 50 years ago, even 15 years ago, when I was, going to school and learning these histories, and the things that have changed since then, and the means to production and the means to disseminating information, I think are hopefully only growing more accessible. So books like Ms. Jones's can get published, but we see still from her op-ed and from what happened, without getting any commentary on it, but what happened in Lafayette, that even if you can write the book, if you could get the history and write the book and get it published, it's still can be difficult to get it out there and get it read. And so, you know, I guess it just makes you think about how civics lessons are evolving. Maybe one step forward, two steps back sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And your point is really well taken. And it's, of course, there are many books published. There are a constant stream of books published. And so publishing a book is one thing, but whether it's able to reach people is another thing, and whether people are able to, are the receptive to the messages and ideas of the book is another thing. I'm heartened by the fact that this book has got a really big reception. Also that Martha Jones is very active, as Amanda mentioned, publishing an op-ed, not only about our controversy here in Louisiana, but also she's published a bunch of op-eds. She's active as a sort of public scholar in addition to, you know, quote unquote, merely writing the books. Yeah. And she mentions, I was thinking about a book that she discusses in the book, which it was by Haley Quinn Brown, who was the president of the NACW in the 1920s. And Haley Quinn Brown wrote a book, I think it was 1930 or 31, called Homespun Heroines and Other Women of Distinction, which was really a similar book, you know, about Black women who had been active in various ways, and Haley Quinn Brown was, you know, resurrecting their histories for her audience, and it went through many reprintings. You know, it was a successful book as these things go, but you know, that was almost a century ago, and so histories can be hidden and then unearthed and then hidden again. And so, you know, history in a way is, and it happens in so many different ways. There's books, there's schools, there's civic education, there's movies and TV shows. And, you know, our understandings of history come from so many different places. We have a hand up from Sean Duplantier. Is that right?
It's Duplantier, but I think Emily was first if she wants to go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure, Emily.
Thanks, Sean. I'll keep this short because I did speak a lot last week. I just wanted to respond to Sarah. I'm Emily. I work at the New Orleans Public Library, but of course my comments don't reflect that entity, just myself personally. But I will say that my experience at the library has taught me that while it's never great to try to, you know, block people from access to books or censor books, one thing that always happens when something like this happens, like what happened in Lafayette, is I think it brought these books and this program to the attention of a lot of people. And that always happens when you try to censor or block books. I mean, it works both ways. Like when people thought that Dr. Seuss was being canceled, you know, they started requesting Dr. Seuss books. But so, you know, I think that that's a really cool instinct of ours as human beings. We're like, oh, you don't want me to have this information? Okay, well now I'm gonna go look at it, you know, and all of that. So I'm really excited to be a part of this program. I can't wait to see what Sean says, and I'm really enjoying hearing everybody this morning.
Thank you so much, Emily.
And if you want to go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, to Sarah's point, I think for me, when I was reading, I didn't finish the book. I will say that to start, but I did get about probably like 2/5 of the way through. But I think
That's
the cool
good.
thing,
That's real good.
the cool thing for me was, you know, seeing kind of the evolution of the political power that, you know, Black people and abolitionists were building to, you know, before Reconstruction. Because I think, you know, when we're learning Reconstruction, even if very briefly in school, it just seems like it comes out of nowhere. All these, you know, Black elected officials, you know, and widely so across the South. And, you know, for me, when growing up, I was like, wow, that's wild. Like, where did that come from? But yeah, no one teaches us that, you know, Black people were building political power up until this moment through organizations like the abolitionist movement and through those, you know, those other movements like that. And, you know, today, our Black Lives Matter movement is very much like that, right? It's, we may not be getting, different offices like back in Reconstruction, but political power is not just built, through elections. It's built through other means, and I'm glad we have a book like this to highlight that. I thought that was pretty cool.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned Reconstruction in particular, because I think that even all of American history is sort of fraught and contested terrain, I would say. But Reconstruction is the highlight of that. Reconstruction sort of has a real special place in that interpretations of it and what exactly happened in Reconstruction and how we should understand that, I would say, have a very special place in really the history of race and equality and power in America. And there's a sort of famous series of battles. There was a professor at Columbia named Dunning who came up with a very really white supremacist view of Reconstruction that was very dominant for a long time. That it was an exercise in corruption and incompetence, and that eventually heroic Southerners liberated themselves from this catastrophe. And that was very strongly rebutted by W.E.B. Du Bois. And for a long time, Du Bois, there you go. Thanks, Emily. Du Bois was kind of a lone voice at first, but eventually with in the 60s and 70s, Eric Foner's work on Reconstruction, Foner kind of updated Du Bois's view for a modern era, and that became the dominant view among scholars. But there are obviously still traces of the Dunning view in popular culture and in historical memory and the Confederate monuments and things like Stone Mountain, which we were talking about last week. And it's the battle over Confederate monuments is going on right now in the Tennessee Capitol as Republicans are fighting to keep a statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founder of the KKK, in the Tennessee Capitol. So I don't want to sidetrack us with that, but Reconstruction is something that we are still struggling over. And I would love to hear about other people's experiences of learning histories in school. That is a very relevant subject and one that I find absolutely fascinating. I'm going to admit Judy to the discussion.
Can I say something real quick about my
Yeah,
comment that I posted
please.
in response to Sean? Like I said in the chat to Sean, like, I didn't even learn, sorry, there's yard work being done in my yard, if you guys can hear that in the background. I didn't even learn about Black elected officials, and really very much that now in hindsight feels true about Reconstruction. It was just sort of like, and then the war ended. But I mean, I feel like I left my education in North Georgia feeling like I didn't even learn that the South lost the Civil War, that the Civil War was about slavery. And then it was just like, and bam, we were here, and it was just like this magical, time shift or whatever, a time leap. And yeah, that feels really critical now, that to like, because I think I'll tell you where I first heard about Black elected officials was from a Black man on a train who handed me a $2 bill after we spent hours talking on a train. And he was like, you see this here? You see this here? And he was showing me the picture. He's like, this is the first Black American president. And he was telling me about, and it felt like, I mean, like, not that I was denying what he was saying, but I was like, is this fanfic or like is he rewriting history for himself? And then but not like in a like critical way, but then like looking at, I was like, but then I looked into the history and stuff, and I was like, oh, I can see how he got there. I can see like what story he was telling me, and I felt so honored, but I also felt so ashamed that I was in my late 20s, early 30s before I learned about that, even though, I mean, that's on me because I was an adult, but at the same time, it's like, it's hard to learn the things that you don't know exist,
That's right. I don't see any hands up right this second, so I was thinking I might. Oh, Sarah,
I just
go ahead.
wanted to respond, and I don't know if anybody here is from, maybe grew up in a different region, but I'm from North Florida, so not North Georgia, but not too far off. And I wonder if there's somebody who didn't grow up in maybe the Southeast who could talk about what they learned in civics early, in elementary school, middle school education, because I feel kind of the same way as Emily. Like, we definitely did learn that the South lost. I did know that. But I just, in my mind, it was kind of like the founding, the Civil War, that's over, and then like jump straight to the Civil Rights era. Like, I didn't learn, and I don't know if that's a product of, you're in middle school, so there's only so much nuance we can get into,
Sure.
or if it's a product of, the region that we grew up in. So if there's somebody from outside the region, I would love to hear kind of what a middle school history education was like for them.
Well, that might be me, but I was thinking more elementary. I actually went to elementary school in Northern Virginia in Fairfax, and I did go to junior high in Texas. So while Texas is still the South, I think it's a little outside the Southeast, and it's very specific as the specific epicenter of slavery and all the impacts that's had on our country. But still close enough. But I'll kind of talk about both as quickly as I can. In Fairfax County, which is outside Washington D.C., I guess it would have been between the years of 1990 to 1993. I can say that all they addressed was colonial history because, well, number one, it was
Virginia,
the capital of the colonies, but there was, I can't remember a single acknowledgement about slavery at all. Like, there was nothing about being a slave. There was nothing about Black people as participants in American history, especially earlier colonial history at all. It was all about pilgrims. It was all about Jamestown. Like, not acknowledging that, like, all these places held slaves, etc. I think Sally Hemings wasn't even a topic of discussion or really, a known history at that point, and that was only, only 30 years ago. But in livable memory. And then so I can say, going to junior high in Texas again. So yeah, now we are discussing the Civil War. Now we are discussing, the settling of Texas, that time period. Virtually no mention of slavery. I think maybe at most a paragraph in high school American history.
Rel, you had a hand up about this too.
Yeah, so I went to middle school around the same time, but in Southern California.
Okay.
And what we were taught was that slavery was terrible. Slavery was absolutely really bad. And now everything was fixed. And that was great. And wasn't it great that we got there? That was it, essentially like the middle school civics lesson that I was taught. Also, I feel like it bears mentioning that my brother is adopted and Black. So that was a particular perspective that maybe a particular path of education that I was on, I suppose. Anyway, that's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Rel. And my experience is pretty similar. I grew up in New Jersey, and I received an American history education that I would characterize as liberal, and in some ways, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the values that came out of that to a certain degree. But there's also a denialism and a sort of false optimism that can very easily fall prey to. So yeah, there are many pitfalls on many sides. Hey, Judy. Are you raising your hand, Judy? We need to unmute Judy.
Okay, thank
There
you.
you go. There you go.
No, I just wanted to add a true story vignette. Um, um, I I grew up first in the French Quarter, and then secondly in the area of New Orleans that's now called Bywater. And I on Royal Street, and I would walk every day about 4 or 5 blocks to go to school. And I did learn about Plessy versus Ferguson, but
Mhm.
I had because these really monumental pieces of information, histories, are so minimized in the South. I had no idea until recent years, that I was walking by every day. I walked by the bus stop where Homer Plessy caught the train
Right.
that led to Plessy versus Ferguson.
Right.
I guess maybe about 15 years ago, 12 or 15 years ago, a group put up a historic plaque right there by my school that I went to. I walked there every day and had no idea. There was absolutely nothing until recent history to indicate that this monumental episode in our American history took place. And to the issue of monuments, I mean, boy, what does that say? What does that
Yeah.
say? That for hundreds of years we do nothing to honor Plessy versus Ferguson, but yet we've got Nathan Bedford in the capital of the Tennessee legislature,
Right.
and we've got anyway, these big monuments all over the place. So anyway, I just wanted to pass it on as a true story.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Judy. And I want to say that there is now a historical marker
Right,
at that
exactly.
spot. And
Right.
that went up just a couple of years ago. I believe the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities and Historical New Orleans Collection have done some work in, updating our historical iconography here in New Orleans.
And let me just add one thing that I think is
Sure.
beautiful is that descendants of Plessy and Ferguson, they exist now, and they have initiated an effort called, instead of Plessy versus Ferguson, it's Plessy and Ferguson, to advocate for peace on earth. Coming together, and I love that. I love that instead of Plessy versus Ferguson, we are Plessy and Ferguson.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Judy.
Wanted to let Sean in here.
Sure. Let's take Sean, and then I think that we should do a pivot to discussion question number 2, since I think we're already sort of pointing to it. But go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I went to predominantly Black Catholic private schools in New Orleans growing up, and I feel like it was, Black History Month. Like every year, we had to have a project on, a civil rights leader, and talk about them, present them. I feel like here in New Orleans, it was like, at least the schools I went to, all those things, at least like the big things like slavery and the civil rights movement, those are pretty apparent for us, and very much taught to us. But like Will said, kind of a liberal kind of mindset, where everything's kind of hunky-dory now. Not completely, but don't forget those things, but also things are better. But and for high school, I went to a predominantly white high school, and it was much different going there. I feel like the emphasis on Black history was not as emphasized as it was in those earlier schools. But one of the things I noticed, learning more about those histories, is that I feel like, and we've talked about this, like the hidden histories, right? There's only so much. I mean, sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right? And I feel like we were given, kind of just like all the civil rights era leaders and activists and stuff, but folks like that we're talking about in the book, like I've never heard of. And honestly, Sojourner Truth, I barely know much about her, but what a monumental figure. So yeah, it's I think we just got to keep uncovering, right, and keep focusing on those histories.
Emily?
Hey, Sean, if it's okay to ask this, were your teachers predominantly like Black women? I was having conversations about civics education with two of my Black male friends that are close in age, and we accidentally realized that we knew that they both went to 45 and they had the same civics teacher, and it sounds like they got like a really solid civics education, but it wasn't necessarily like the approved curriculum. It was like, I'm gonna add on. So I'm wondering if you had that experience as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. In those elementary schools and middle schools, they were predominantly Black. But as I got in high school, I think I had one Black teacher the whole time there, Black woman teacher. I actually teach at a predominantly white school now, and I'm one of 3 Black teachers in the whole school. But yeah, it's yeah, we're still we're integrated in some ways, but not completely.
Thanks for doing that work. I know it must be hard.
So we're discussing, history and its various uses and abuses. And in this book, so I'm going to the next discussion question because it really flows organically from where we were. But in Vanguard, Martha Jones discusses some of the obstacles that have prevented Black people from voting, and she's referring to devices from the Jim Crow era, such as poll taxes, literacy tests, violent intimidation. And she observes that, quote, without the vote, Black Americans had to build other routes to political power. And the question is, what were these alternative routes to political power? Why were they a necessary step in Black Americans' journey? And just, if I can just extend that a little bit, Martha Jones says in the op-ed in the Washington Post that she sees the women that she writes about in the book as being among the architects of American democracy, which I think is a great, if I had to pick one sentence that encapsulates the book, it's that these women are among the architects of American democracy. And so what is political participation? What is being an architect of democracy outside of, voting? Sean?
Yeah, just real quick on that quote you pulled up. Yeah, that one really struck for me because I think when we think of equality in this American sense, I think so many of us think of it in that way that everybody, no matter your race, sex, sexual orientation, all those things, you are we are equal in in theory at least. But yeah, that was not something that was created by our white male founders. That was very much designed, that was Black women who were at the bottom of the social structure, who said, no, we are all equal. And it does, yeah, that sense of, that definition of equality is very much defined by them.
Yeah, absolutely. We have, well, Amanda, I don't know if you need to, put your hand up to speak.
To be fair, I'm participating too. We're all equals here. I was thinking about organization directly outside of like elected politics, and how Black women are responsible for essentially starting movements. When I was thinking actually of the recent incidents of Me Too, where that is a political, that was like, it really swept our nation, starting in 2017, and it was all it was started by a Black woman. And not everybody is aware that something as massive as, like, me, or modern and massive as Me Too was the work of a Black woman named Tarana Burke. So the idea that Black women are still, like, founding some of the biggest social/political movements of recent memory, and yet still aren't acknowledged for being the genesis of the work to begin with, is just so reflective of, like, the movements that Martha Jones speaks about in the book.
Yeah. I would just want to, so this morning I made a list of notes of the many organizations and avenues that Professor Jones discusses in the book. And these are, so the book is not only covers a great number of individual women, it also covers a lot of institutions. There's a lot of acronyms in the book. Sometimes it gets a little hard to remember which is which, but so in my list of sort of ways of organizing for power outside of politics, this is what I came up with. Going back to the 1820s, newspapers, Freedom's Journal, Frederick Douglass's newspaper, the North Star, the Garrison newspaper, the anti-slavery movement in general, the anti-slavery conferences, the so-called colored convention movement, which began in the 1830s in Philadelphia, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the historically Black colleges and universities, the so-called literary associations, which were closely allied to the anti-slavery movement, the Daughters of Zion, which was mostly Black women Methodists, the publications of books, articles, poems, and sermons, the American Equal Rights Association, which was one women's suffrage group, the NACW, which stands for National Association of Colored Women, starting in the 1890s, the UNIA, which was the Pan-Africanist group associated with Marcus Garvey, the so-called Niagara Movement, which led to the NAACP, the NCNW, which was National Council of Negro Women, reflecting the change in usages that was originated in the 1930s, and then up to the Civil Rights Movement and SNCC, SCLC, and right up to the present day with Stacey Abrams' organization and other things that have already been mentioned in the discussion. But that's quite a list of organizations and institutions, and I'm wondering if anyone has any thoughts about why institutions are so important, or any personal experience with any of them.
I'd like to say something.
Yeah, please.
Well, it was kind of obvious, I guess, that you couldn't just bogart your way directly to the top. You were going to have to, you were going to have to take it in little bits and pieces, and so, and you had to prepare your people to move toward that front, toward the end that you were hoping to, or goal you were hoping to realize. And the best way to do that was to bring them together around things that they could all relate to. They could relate to family, they could relate to church, they could relate to, and when I say family, those who were free as well as enslaved, and so that's where they sought to garner support, educate, and inform, and then progress gradually toward the goal of freedom for all, women's rights, and voting. And I don't mean that in any necessary order, but that's the way I see it. And I have to tell you that the same is still true today, because if one of the big arguments about the events happening in Georgia is souls to the poll. We do souls to the poll in Louisiana,
Right.
and the church is still very much an integral part of African American life, culture,
Yeah.
history, and so when you start, when you impact an aspect of that family life, that churches have can wield a lot of power. They have a lot of parishioners. And so you have to think about that. And from what I understand, Georgia has backed off at least a minute, on the souls to the poll issue.
Which also has to do with whether you can actually vote on Sunday, right?
Right. And so it's important for you to you can't always go directly at an issue. Take the civil rights movement. When we were out there in the, on the front line by ourselves, and I mean African Americans by ourselves, that's when the police truly brought in the dogs and got the batons and the gas and the super water hoses. But the minute white folks joined forces with us and we marched as a group, an open group of humanity, a sea of humanity, they restrained themselves. We have to understand and realize the importance of building coalitions. First, build within your own groups. Then build coalitions. And various communities, interfaith groups are doing that. They are building coalitions between churches, various denominations and ethnic groups, so that they become a force to be reckoned with as a sea of humanity. I say that, look at Together Louisiana. We have Together Baton Rouge here, Together Louisiana. I mean, a force to be reckoned with. And so, you can't always, that's why I say you can't just always just bogart your way in. You have to come up with devise a plan so that you get your bits and pieces, and you bring others to the table with you.
Right.
And then you become a force to be reckoned with. And so that was the importance of all these alternative routes, as you say.
Right.
One more thing, and then I'm gonna shut up. Look at the coalition that was already in place, but became ever so obvious in this recent election when Kamala Harris said she was a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, one of the Divine Nine. I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So when we come to the table, just my little sisterhood, the oldest, of course, in the country, let me say the oldest sisterhood, African American sisterhood in the country. When we come to the table, we bring 300,000 of us to the table.
Yeah.
And so when you bring in, and my hands are like this, because in Louisiana, that's part of our culture. We got to talk, that's our hand. We have to bring in our hands. When you bring in the Divine Nine, as we call ourselves, which the fraternities and the sororities, you start doing the number count. That's a lot of people coming to the table. And so that's why I say what I do, build those coalitions, and then when you start moving toward realizing that goal and folks see who's a part of that, and I'm not, that eyes are opened, and people, I'm not going to say back down, but then they become more willing to compromise.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much for that, Bridget. And the
Can I say something to please? I just wanted to do a very, very special shout out to Reverend Warnock this past week. And I think that I mean, I know we're talking about women, but I mean, he just is such an outstanding example of the, the church and the, I have always been so struck with what fantastic orators come out of Black churches. I mean, he's such an excellent speaker, and of course Martin Luther King and so many others. And the reason that matters to me, I think that the engine in all of this has to be education, and we have to remember that during slavery and during Reconstruction, much of Reconstruction, it was against the law. It was a sin. It was a sin to teach Black children. It was against the law to teach them. Yet Black women kept education alive, and they were, of course, a tremendous force behind, the development of Black colleges. And I just find that just such fitting justice that these fantastic orators and education comes from a group that was told that it was illegal and it was sinful to be educated. So that's all I wanted to say. I have so much respect for Reverend Warnock and what he did and what he continues to do and what he stands for. Thank you.
that was Judy, right?
Yeah, Judy
Okay.
LaBoyd.
Your video froze on my screen, but I recognize your voice at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks, Judy, and thanks, Bridget, for your comments and your remark. You couldn't just bogart your way directly to the top. I think I may quote that in the future. You reminded me of, I think, one of the very striking and consistent themes throughout Vanguard is, for many of, or really all of these women in their different time periods and in their different spheres, they really cultivated a great deal of pragmatism and practical strategy and coalition building and alliance building that was opportunistic at times, where they'd be willing to overlook certain differences and make common cause when there was common ground. For example, with the mainstream or white women's suffrage movement, there was a lot of common ground, and sometimes there was also some division, and the mainstream suffragists could be fair weather friends at times, and there was always a sort of vulnerability to a Black-white divide within the women suffragists, but the Black women suffragists like Haley Quinn Brown recognized this dynamic, and so they were able to count on these women as allies when they knew that there was common ground that they could be relied on, and they did not have the really luxury of being sort of excessively purist or indulging in an uncompromising attitude. And I think that in the last few years, since the Trump era, there's been a great partisanization, and everyone's been very, preoccupied with party politics. And it's important to remember that, there is more to political life than Democrats versus Republicans. So we have three hands, and I don't know what the order was. Do you know, Amanda?
mine was really quick. I think it was me and Jim and Celine at the same time, and then Emily. But mine was really quick, and I just wanted to speak about how in the initial survey that Martha Jones is giving of Black women and how they really their involvement in their organizations, even from the very beginning, is that I don't like 50% of the women, the very first women mentioned in this book, were responsible for creating colleges for African Americans, like for African American women, for African American men, but like the absolute central role that education and the creation of educational opportunity for like disenfranchised people were like central to, I mean, and still are central to political organization, like Bridget was saying about like all the fraternity and sorority groups of Alpha Kappa Alpha, like becoming a major, just like feeding into a political bloc. But how this is just, it's how it's been since the beginning, and this brings it back to how we aren't taught African American history in this country, because like this methodology goes back to the early 1800s. It's crazy. That's me. And then I want to hand it over to Jim and Celine.
Hey, Jim and Celine.
Hey, thanks. There is another direction, I think, that has also led to some of the change over time, and that's been through the music. I mean, I grew up in the 60s, 70s, and so you had the whole rock and roll, which derives heavily from a lot of premier Black people who came through the music industry, and a lot of the musicians from the period. I mean, of note, obviously, is Aretha Franklin, who has continued in her efforts as a leader in that whole movement to change. And I think music is one thing that transcends a lot of divisions and is a way to create a greater group or a greater force behind a movement, because it is such a unifying factor. And that's something that the Black culture really has had for centuries. And I think it's something that's helped the U.S. currently. Thank you.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Jim, because I taught a course for a number of years at Loyola about the history of the music industry, which is actually my real background. And I just posted in the chat a link to a book by Glenn Altshuler called All Shook Up, about the rock and roll era. And it really superimposes the rock and roll era on the civil rights era and the Cold War. And in a short book that is very readable, it really takes on that topic so well. And it's one of the books that I just can't recommend enough. One of my favorite scholarly books, but not too scholarly. You might really dig it, and I've recommended it to many people over the years. So thanks for that contribution. And Emily.
I was just going to say, to the point of white women being fair weather friends, it's sad to say, and I've seen it in myself, and I've seen, in others, that like a lot of times we don't get invested until we have skin in the game, or until we feel something that something is affecting us. And that's really sad and unfortunate, because something I've been starting to like sort of speak about recently and started to really just sort of process and feel is that, African American history, Black history is should not be siloed, because it's American history. It's, even if those aren't my direct ancestors, they're my four people. They helped build this country that I live in, and I've just sort of like, and not to say to take ownership or possession or anything like that, but just to sort of take the responsibility of sort of like knowing and honoring like the political and civic ancestors that because white women and white people have gained a lot of rights because of the work of all of our four people, including those of non-white origins, from countries other than Europe, and backgrounds other than Europe. And so even if we can't see like an immediate sort of effect in our lives, like I think it's important to note that like when I started reading more about the people that I hadn't been taught about in the movements, I felt cheated. I felt cheated of my history and my background as well. And again, that sounds really possessive, but I mean that as sort of just like, wow, you just like erased all of this information that I needed as an American. And so like that anger, that feeling of like erasure, like affects us too, if we really sit and think about it. So regardless if we see an immediate like effect in our lives, there is an effect in our lives. We need to know our history, and we need to know the people that built our country.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Emily. And I do want to maybe just attenuate my remark about fair weather friends. I mean, it's certainly not for me to question or lessen the contribution of those white women.
Oh, no, it was fair. It was fair. I wasn't taking any offense to that at all. It's true.
No, but I think, you know, it's also important to recognize that these women were great Americans who worked very hard for a very important cause. And I think that one very revealing story from the book was in the 19-teens. I think it was around 1912, 13, when conservative senator from Mississippi, Jim Vardaman, led a campaign to repeal the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment is the one that says that you can't be disenfranchised on account of race, right? And this was, you know, this was in mainstream politics in the United States Senate, a campaign to repeal that amendment. And what Vardaman did was he essentially went to the white women leaders of the suffrage movement and said, if you support this, we will support the passage of the 19th Amendment guaranteeing white women the vote. So very much trying to drive a wedge between the white women and the African-American women in the suffrage movement. So, you know, in a sort of structural way that it was possible for that wedge to be driven by people with bad intentions and bad faith. And with that, it's 20 after 12, and I'm certainly willing to keep going a little longer, but I have a wave from Bridget and maybe from Judy as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, do you see the wedges that are being driven now with the divisiveness coming from our politicians? As I read through this book, some of those old angers that I used to feel just said, whoa, here we go, me. You know, they just kind of grabbed me again. And you know, and so as a result, I have to figure out and find my own way to channel that energy. You know, so I'm having to find a way to talk to people who I have considered friends in the past, and now their Facebook post leave me in awe of whatever I thought was a friendship or relationship.
Sure.
You know, questioned, and I don't like that feeling, and I haven't come up with a way yet. I just don't respond, but you know, I haven't come up with a way yet to have a discussion with them. You know, maybe in that sense, COVID has been a good thing for me, because I don't know how, you know, how quiet and peaceful that conversation could be at this moment, as opposed to one finger pointing and yelling and screaming like, have you lost your mind kind of thing. You know, you sat at my dinner table, we drank wine together, we partied together, and then you come out and write something stupid like, well, I guess it's time to get the ammunition. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so I'm just saying, you know.
I think that the question of social media and how it's affected our political discourse is certainly we could spend many weeks discussion on that topic alone. Uh, Emily and Sarah, well, let's hear Emily first. Were you going to speak to that?
I promise I've talked so much. This is quick. Miss Bridget, I was just wondering if you could maybe write them a letter, and maybe that will help. But also I want to say one of the things that makes me so sad and so angry is how we have sort of denied, Black folks the right to be angry. And I felt what you just said, like in the core of my soul. And I hope that you're able to sort of safely express how you feel to this person, full out, including the anger, and that if they're a true friend, they can accept the anger and try to like see the error of their ways, or leave you alone if they're not, you know. So that's all I wanted to say. Sorry.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Emma.
Sarah?
Bridget's point just made me think of what you were saying about the politician who tried to, entice white suffragettes to support repealing the 15th Amendment.
Vardaman, yeah.
And I mean, you have to recognize in that example, kind of unfortunately the same thing that we're seeing a lot today, is that Senator Vardaman wasn't doing that to help the white women. Helping them was a means to his own end. Right. And so you have to think about when politicians are appealing to you in some way that divides you from other people, are they really doing it to help you, or are they using you as a vehicle to help themselves? And so it's sad. And I mean, I know that sounds really cynical, but you have to think about when people are trying to put divisions between you and other groups, if it's actually, I mean, it may even incrementally be helping you, but who are you actually helping more by like getting angry and separating yourself from someone else? Are you really helping yourself? Or are you working on somebody else's hidden agenda?
Right. To me, the essence of a democratic society, or if you will, a liberal democratic society, is a recognition that there will be conflict and that there will be disagreement among people. We won't all be unified about things. So it's very important that the structures within which we have our battles are solid and respected and mutually agreed upon. And to take an anti-democratic or anti-liberal mindset like fascism seeks to create a unity. Everybody must agree, and if you don't agree, you are othered, or you are outside of who counts as people. And so I think for those of us who are interested in democracy, we want to recognize that there will always be disagreement, and we need to find ways to disagree within a structure. Yeah, Rel. I thought I saw Rel.
Yeah, you
oh,
did.
there you are.
I was trying to raise my hand electronically. Anyway, as I was listening to Sarah's comment, I started thinking about, there's a big movement to divide feminists from TERFs, right? This is a different example, the one that just came to mind. But, yes, I have common ground with them, I guess, potentially, hypothetically, but no, I want to be divided from those people. Like, I definitely, I guess I'm saying, like, yes, finding common ground is important, but also who you deliberately try to exclude is also important. I don't know, like, anyway, I just wanted to say I'm a little confused about that point, and if anyone would like to speak more about how to figure out when to divide or when to exclude and when to find common ground, I don't know. I just think that's an interesting topic. That was all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and it's a very difficult question. Anybody have on that?
I was gonna say I do. I was thinking we're getting a little far afield because we're not like relating it directly to it. But
True.
I do want to say it becomes a chicken or the egg situation. Which group started exclusion? I would argue that the first group to start excluding people were the TERFs, not vice versa. Yeah, I don't want to get too far afield with this, but
I think we should maybe bring it back to the book a little bit.
Yeah,
But
sorry,
I mean, you know, it's the nature of a discussion. You want to let it go where it goes, of course.
Well, I think I can maybe speak to Sarah and Rel's points and kind of bring it back to the book too, and be like, you know, like when someone is saying, you know, like I guess we have to compromise, especially when we're working with people, but at the same time, we have to consider like what we're willing to compromise, you know, and what we're not, you know, and I think we have to sit with that and do that as individuals, or do that in our main sort of organizing or bodies or communities, you know. So like, so if someone came to you, and of course nobody can really speak to what they would do in that historical example, because you know there's all these like cultural pressures on you in the moment, you know, and I've been trying to like understand like the founding fathers and how they could be so like rebellious and like liberal in some ways, and also so like not, that they could fail to conceptualize like you know what they wanted for themselves, for like all people, or conceptualize the people around them as people. But that's going a little far afield. So but it's hard. But if someone came to you with like the, you know, I'm going to give you, you know, all of my support for women's rights, except I expect you to exclude like a huge chunk of women, like, I mean, that's just one of those moments where you have to like, you have to consider, like what you're willing to sacrifice and what you're willing to compromise on. And so I think moving forward, as Miss Bridget pointed out, do we see the ways in which people are trying to drive wedges now? And you know, maybe it's not so easy to see in the moment or whatever, but maybe we have to start working on identifying, you know, like, I mean, I just keep going back to the fact we stopped teaching rhetoric in schools, you know, and women in particular don't have access, like young women don't have access to like rhetorical education in a lot of ways. And so like we need, you know, but we need this again. We need to really analyze the media around us. We need to really analyze the agendas of the people who are giving us information, you know. Anyways, about the book. So like, I mean, I think it's pretty clear, like with a book, it can be pretty easy to identify somebody's agenda, you know, and everybody has an agenda, even if it's not necessarily like a manipulative or negative agenda. But it can be harder to do that in like on Facebook or in face-to-face conversations with people, you know.
Yeah.
I'm
Let's
sorry.
let's hear from Rel and then Bridget quickly.
I thought about how to frame it really quickly. A much better example is I just read, by the way, a couple months ago, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and a lot of things that we're discussing in this conversation have been reminding me of that book. But of course, and it's great. I recommend it. Anyone should read it. It's wonderful. But in it, the talk about assimilationism. It's like, how far do you go? How far do you let the team up with the assimilationists? Because when you do team up with the assimilationists, you're doing exactly what we're talking about, excluding all of the people that are not willing to play along, you know? Anyway, just wanted to give a better example of what I was talking about, but the end.
Yeah, I think that's very apropos analogy. Bridget, did you have something?
Sometimes I just wanted to comment on what
Yeah.
Emily said. Sometimes agendas aren't always what they seem. They may appear to be self-serving, but maybe, you know, it's like trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And so, you know, if you think about, you know, the women's rights movement, and then what happened, you know, in 19 and you know early 1900s, was were did they think maybe that if the white women got the vote, then they could later on bring, you know, the black women to the table? You know, it's like, let us get this one first and then we'll pull you along. I mean, it's that, to me, that was never, you know, actually stated. And so if maybe they had done the right coalition building, then that could have happened. Instead, well, we know what happened.
Right.
You know, but I'm sorry, it's not always obvious. You know, there could be something behind the scenes that we just may not be privy to. So I don't know.
I do think it is important to mention, based on that story about Senator Vardaman and his attempt to repeal the 15th Amendment, is that it was a failure. It not only did not succeed, but it failed catastrophically, and it was seen as a very humiliating setback for the white supremacist Democrats of the South, and he did not succeed in driving that wedge, at least to the extent that he undoubtedly wanted to. In that case. So Amanda, I was thinking, I was thinking to throw out discussion question number 12, which is very kind of just to solicit some quick thoughts by way of conclusion. But the question is, voting rights advocate and former Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams, I know you all know who Stacey Abrams is, urges Americans not to be bound by what they have seen. And I think the question, which is very profound, is what in American society have you not yet seen but are waiting expectantly for?
A female president?
Yes. So much.
so much that we're waiting for.
I'm waiting for the ability to be aggressive and not be chastised for that, or be bold, and also like for the Black folks around me to feel safe to express their full range of emotions and thoughts and feelings, because you know we haven't punished them or turned on them for it, you know, long enough that we've made our community safe for that.
Who else? Rel in the chat just typed democracy.
Yeah, I guess like when I was in college, I studied abroad in Greece, which, you know, famous for their democracy, sort of. And in Greece, it's an opt-out system. Everyone has they have compulsory voting there now. I believe. I don't think you'll like go to jail if you don't do it, but it's like everyone does it. And I don't know if that's what I'm advocating necessarily, but yeah, real democracy where people are encouraged to vote, where where we have a holiday for voting day and we celebrate democracy, and we're like, isn't it great that we're all doing actual democracy? That would be nice.
Rel, do you feel that democracy is an either or is it a more or less? Like, do you have it or you don't, or can you have a little of it and then have more?
I guess you can have a little of it and then have more, but there's certain there must be some threshold that's reached. Like, I guess you can call it democracy if you only let white landowning men do it, but it's really just the idea of democracy that you're striving at. I mean, I guess I do think it's like a sort of on-off situation, and yet there are places with more we have some degree of democracy here in America, but we're really trying our best to destroy it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I only press you on that because I think that's, democracy itself is a very contested idea, and what we mean by it is sometimes not made explicit. And it is, to me, it is important to remember also that in much of the rest of the world, that there is zero,
Right. Yeah. When you look at the map of countries that are fascistic, don't Google map of what countries are fascistic. It is terrifying. Anyway.
Judy.
Yeah, I would say the top of the list, and I'm not quite sure how to word it, but it would be for our districts not to be gerrymandered. I don't know if that's how to say it. I mean, there's the, hats off to the Republicans that they figured out how to jump in there, 12 years ago, whatever, and figured out how to manipulate and come up with these districts that totally are just masterful at suppressing votes.
Mm-hmm.
That would be at the top of my list. The second thing is I'm the daughter of a union carpenter and one of 4 children. And I know that we would not have had what we had my dad not been a union carpenter. And it bothers me enormously that people work overwhelmingly, say at Wendy's or Popeyes or something, and they're paid a wage that we know that is not a living wage. I think that people, and they're not allowed to work a full 40 weeks because then they would qualify for benefits. So they're kept at 30, 32 weeks. So I mean, if Costco can pay their people $16 an hour for starters, I think that is an excellent example for employers, especially Jeff Bezos. I just would love to see people be able to work for 40 hours, get benefits, and earn some kind of a living wage. And I don't even know that $15 is enough. But I mean, I think in the state of Georgia, the minimum wage is $5. And I think it's a sin that people have to work for so little money. I think it's terrible. And I guess I don't know if this goes to the issue of democracy, but I mean, in our country, majority is supposed to rule, not minority. So this filibuster thing that I've never understood, it's totally ridiculous that the minority party in the Senate is keeping the majority party from doing what they were elected to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get that. I don't, and I never really have totally understood all of the antagonism between a republic and a democracy. I mean, in deep inside my soul, I think we all know that the majority is supposed to rule, not the minority.
Thanks, Judy. I think you really just hit 3 of the big things right there, which was, I think you started off with gerrymandering and
Right.
economic equity or economic fairness, and the Senate and the filibuster. Yeah, I think those are all really important. In the comments, Rel said, let's get rid of voter suppression. Amanda said automatic voter registration as soon as you get a social security number. Emily posted a quotation from last week's book, which I think is very apropos. So thank you for that, Emily. Anyone, maybe we take one more, Amanda. Anybody want to have the last word here?
If anybody else would like to add something in, and I'm also going to post the survey link in chat, so be sure to stop off and do that when we leave here today.
I don't want to necessarily have the last word, but I just wanted to say, I just want to say something real quick. Let's get rid of voter suppression. And I think Ms. Judy also said something that made me think that, like, the folks that are working, for $5 an hour in Georgia, or working in fast food and can't, pay their bills and take care of their families on those funds, but are working like, 2 part-time jobs to make up for a full-time job. That is voter suppression, because then how do they get to the polls? Like, if they got to go from job to job, if they're not full-time worker and they don't have job protection to leave work, to go vote, and then how do they participate? How do they hold their representatives accountable? How do they attend city council meetings? All of that stuff. And so we see that, like in Georgia, they're trying to pass a law that makes it illegal to give water and food to people waiting in lines at the polls. And they've made it so that lines are so long in Georgia because there's not enough polling locations. And that's voter suppression, because again, how do you, if you don't have like a white collar job with, like, security and benefits, how do you stand in line all day to vote in order to, like, exercise your franchise? And so voter suppression does not necessarily wear the face it used to wear. And we gotta catch it where it lives. And I'm thinking, I love Louisiana, but maybe I need to move back to Georgia because and go work with Stacey Abrams groups or something like that, because there's some crazy stuff happening in Georgia lately.
Well, on that note, I want to, and we'll, yeah, sure. We have Judy with a hand up, and we have Bridget also. So, Judy, real quick, what did you have something on that?
Yeah, I was just going to end everything on 2 happy notes. One, how fantastic to have Reverend Warnock, the first ever Black senator from Georgia, and then Ossoff. How fantastic to have them as our new senators. I mean, I just love that. That makes me so happy. And then secondly, to Jim's point about when he was talking about the tremendous power of music, I wanted to pass on a funny thing that happened when I went to France many years ago. I was so excited to be there, and I go into this little cafe expecting to hear Edith Piaf, and I'm listening to Michael Jackson. I just thought, wow, we owe so much to Black people for what they have contributed to our society and our country, and I for one am grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you so much for being here. And Bridget posted in the chat, you can work with Stacey by visiting Georgia and helping her out, and or by sending money. That was what you were going to say earlier, Bridget? Great.
Yeah, that's her link, fairfight.com, and then
great.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, I really want to make a pitch for everybody for next week. And here's the book for next week by Carol Anderson, One Person, No Vote. And it is, of the 4 books in the series, it's definitely the most current. And it deals very directly with issues that we've been talking about, especially in the last 1/3 or so of this discussion. Voter roll purges, automatic registration, early voting, various, sophisticated forms of disenfranchisement, gerrymandering, and so on. And it's very well done, and it's also a passionately argued book, and it's quite readable. So hope you can take a look at it, and really hope you can join us again next Saturday, and come prepared to talk and discuss and contribute. And really, it's so great for me to be here, and thank you so much for spending this time on a Saturday doing this. It's valuable. One thing Bridget was talking about social media, and I think that there's so much value to a discussion where you can listen to each other and see each other and have a dialogue rather than just posting some angry thing on Facebook or Twitter or something. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Lo. I wanted to thank you again for being here, and also to thank the Friends of New Orleans Public Library and the Louisiana Endowment for Humanities for making this possible. I want to thank again everybody for being here. It was so great to see y'all. And I also wanted to say, I mean, even if you don't have it, I know I sent out all the copies we have, but they're still available in the library catalog, and it's probably available in your public library catalog, wherever you may be. But One Person, No Vote by Carol Anderson is great. And in all honesty, if this matters to y'all, or if you're worried about it, it's this thick, but only about 2/3 of that is the actual text. The other 1/3 of it is her citing all her sources. It's legit, but it's also super readable. I highly recommend it. One Person, No Vote by Carol Anderson. And then thank you all again. I'll leave the chat open for a few more minutes for everybody to exchange. But I hope that we can see you again next Saturday at 11, and any friends that you want to bring along. Very excited. And thank you. Thank you again, everyone. It was good to see your faces.
So long, y'all.